So I was raised Roman Catholic and very strict upbringing and dysfunctional. But then I became an atheist when I was 20. It wasn't until my near-death experience in 2007 where I became a believer. I'll just say believer because I won't lock myself into a religion. I was working out all the time, doing my yoga, so on and so forth. And one night I came home and my stomach it was so upset. And then it was just pain in my back. And I was trying to do all these yoga positions, trying to like calm my body, but it just progressively got worse and worse throughout the night. So it turned out, long story short, it turned out to be C. diff colitis. But the C. diff colitis was treated, and after being treated, it should have been gone within 3 or 4 days. I was still having excruciating pain. So I kept complaining of pain, and I had a hospitalist tell me that, oh, I've given you, 2 milligrams of morphine. I've upped it to 4 milligrams of morphine. I've given you all of this stuff, and you shouldn't be in pain anymore. I think you're a drug seeker. And I'm laying there. Oh my gosh, And so for the first time, I heard someone talk to me, but I didn't know who it was. And I heard, make a scene, make it big, or you won't make it out. So I happened to be in a Catholic hospital at the time when this happened. And I thought, well, I know how to offend Catholics. I just say a few things and miraculously I will offend everybody, which I did. So I got the attention that I needed, and I fired that doctor, that hospitalist. And then I don't know how much time went by, but another one walked in and she looked at me and I scanned her with my eyes and I heard something again. And I heard, you can relax. She knows what she's doing. And I'm thinking, who is telling me this? Where is this coming from? So then she looked at me, did a test, and it turned out I was in kidney failure. So it was so bad because for days they let me drag on where they didn't identify what it was that I was dealing with. So then they got me to dialysis. And as it turns out, it took them a number of days to figure out I have a rare autoimmune disease that kicks in to women primarily in their mid to late 30s, which is where I was. So that's how it started. And it got to a point where I just went into my near-death experience. I closed my eyes and I was told I could relax. I remember walking through the clouds, and I remember it looking like Earth. So there was the grass, there were trees, there were the clouds in the sky. It was 72 degrees, sunny, and there's Jesus standing under this tree and he's waiting for me. And I looked at him and I was so surprised. I was like, oh my gosh, you really do exist. And he looked at me and he laughed and he extended his arms out. And then, it was like, okay, I can come forward and give him a hug. And so he gives me a hug and then he says, come on, I've got a lot of work to do with you. And I said, I know, you're dealing with me, So he took me to meet my other guides, and my other guides were Archangel Michael, El Moria, Mother Mary, and Saint Germain. And we went into this golden capsule and I had to watch my life review. And so it was like, I swear to you, it was like a therapist. You're standing there, you're watching every single second of your life. And then any happy times, traumatic times, anything, they would pause it and say, okay, how do you feel right here? And then I heard what the other person was thinking. So it was so complex, and I was compounded with emotion, not just from me, but from the other person in the scene or the other people that were in the circumstance with me or situation, whatever it was. So it was really amazing. And then after I had witnessed my life review, at the very end, they said, okay, how do you feel right now? And I just stood there and I said, this too shall pass. And I don't remember what they were referring to when they asked me how I was feeling. But when I said, this too shall pass, they said, oh, you've got it. And so I thought, okay, and then the next thing that I remember is being taken into another golden capsule. And these cherubs, they don't talk. They're all gold. And they were fluttering around, and they were it's like, it was like a white robe, okay? So, or a toga is what I say. And then they put it was a white stole over me, and it had like gold in it. And then there was a little earth emblem down at the bottom, which meant visitor. That was their code for visitor. And then all of a sudden, Archangel Michael walked in. And I was like, oh my God, and I already feel horrible. I used some foul language in heaven. I won't use it on here, but I did, because that's who I was, fresh off earth. And he looked at me and he started talking to me, and he was very kind. And he's Black, by the way. And he's gorgeous. I mean, he's just absolutely beautiful, with this long hair to like his shoulders, and it's wavy and thick, and these beautiful, I can't remember, it's like his eyes changed, I saw him with blue eyes. I saw him with like these, like, almost a light hazel. I don't know how to describe it. And I remember he was so kind to me and had just this feeling of unconditional love. And I'd never felt that before. So I looked at him and I started crying, and he says, Megan, why are you crying? And I said, because I've been so mean to you guys. I've called you all these names from earth, which I will edit right now. And I've said, I can't believe I'm here in heaven, that you and Jesus have been so nice to me. And he says, Megan, I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to love you. And so I was like, oh my gosh, feeling even worse. So he put up his right hand, and a white beam of light came out and was hitting my soul, which is right in the chest area between the breastbone. And he was saying the Aramaic version of Psalm 91. And so I was like, wow, what is this? So after he did that, then he took me out of the capsule, and then there were my other guides, and then we all started walking toward temple. So I had no idea what was happening. Zero. And they said, come on, others are waiting to meet you. And I said, there are people waiting to meet me? And they didn't say who. And I said, yes. They said yes. And I said, okay. And so there was a little cherub on each side of this huge temple, and it was white, and like these little decks, and then these cherubs were playing these golden trumpets, and it was the announcement that I was coming. And so I'm watching this, just like I'm absolutely beside myself, because I was such an atheist. So Jesus goes and opens up the door, and then I think the other 3 or 4 guides went in, and then I went in after them. And then Jesus came in behind me. And so I watched my other guides sit down at this golden table, and there was 1 chair left. Well, actually 2. And so Jesus came up to my left and pulled out the chair and that I was to sit in. And I sat down, and then he sat down to my left. And to my right was Archangel Michael. And then it was Archangel Gabriel, Archangel Raphael. I mean, there were 27 archangels. I can't even remember them. Archangel Azrael, Archangel, who were they all? Zadkiel. There were so many. And then to Jesus's left was God, but I didn't know who this guy was. So I'm sitting there, and he just starts talking. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, who is this guy? What is he talking about? Why are all these people listening to him? I had no idea what was going on. It felt amazing to be in this space. absolutely amazing. All I could feel was love and welcoming. That's all I could feel. But I'm sitting there wondering, who is this guy? And all of a sudden he said, and Megan will be going back to Earth. And in my head alone, I said, oh, F, you know, and I didn't say it out loud. And God stopped talking and he looked at me and he says, oh, F is right, Megan. And he said, be careful what you wish for, because I hear those too. And then I flashed back on my catechism days and growing up in the Roman Catholic Church. And I went, oh my gosh. So that was the moment that I knew it was God. And then I said, oh, Your Holiness, you know, I can't even remember like all of these ways in which I was trying to stumble over getting, you know, my apology through to get his forgiveness. And so he smiled and he says, I've already forgiven you. And I was like, oh, okay, good, you know. And then he says, Megan, we just want you to be yourself. And everybody was watching me. And I sat there and I was real comfortable with God at that moment. And I put my arm up on the golden chair that I was sitting in. And I slouched down and I said, well, then, okay, fine. I'll just be myself, you know. And everybody started laughing. So there were messages that were given to me, and I had to walk around the table 77 times because there were 77 of us. But I don't remember every message. I just remember some of the really, the ones that I remember, for some reason I'm supposed to remember, even to this day. Like one was when I got around to White Eagle. My grandmother, when I was a teenager, had given me this little book called The Quiet Mind by White Eagle. And I knew that he had poetry. So he looked at me and he said, Megan, he says, when you come across a white feather, it's not a tribal thing. He says, I want you to think about it. Are you doing or are you being? I have never forgotten that, Jeff. I looked at him like, oh my gosh, I got to answer right now. And then I didn't say anything. And he could see like the concern on my face, like I wanted to answer it correctly. And he says, no, don't answer it now. He says, just think about it. Just think about it. So there were other messages that came out in that time in there. And then there was one point when I remember I had the opportunity to go through this giant wooden door. And I looked back at God and the table, everybody sitting at the table, and I said, so you mean to tell me if I go through this door, I can go into heaven and I don't have to go back to earth anymore? And they all said in unison, yes, with a smile on their face. And I looked at them all and I said, oh, well, now my Catholic guilt is kicking in. I said, forget it. I'm just going to go back as you've all instructed me to do. And they all started laughing because I was keeping it light and, you know, I was taking them seriously, but I was trying to make a joke too. But anyway, so yeah. And then I went into heaven and there were different things that happened in there too. As a matter of fact, that was just the beginning. So it meant if I went through that wooden door, that meant that I quote unquote died. Well, nobody dies. You think you're going to die because it's so earth. It is such an earth term, I promise you. But nobody dies. So had I gone through that wooden door, I would have stayed there in heaven and I would not be alive on earth right now. However, I stayed there with them inside temple and continued talking to God and Goddess and all of these other souls. And then they took me into heaven. So I was brought in as a guest and I got to experience meetings with different people. I'll say people because they look like people, you know, although heaven is not a bunch of people that look like you and I. I mean, there are the ones that look like people, like God looks like a person. Jesus looks like Jesus. Okay, so they all look like people sitting at the table with me. But then there are other souls from other planets that go there. So it's kind of like the bar scene in Star Wars. So that's what heaven's like. You know, that's all I can think of is the bar scene in Star Wars, which I think George Lucas was just so like tapped into something that the rest of us didn't know about. But now, having been there, I'm like, oh yeah, Star Wars. I was taken back to a tent, and inside the tent, it was the tent that I was staying in. Okay. So they had me like, that was my room while I was there. So they had me staying in this tent, and it was purple on the inside. It was this beautiful royal purple, and it was huge. And there was this table of, it was a very, very long table, because all of the archangels that were in temple with me, they were sitting at this table as well. And then everybody who I just mentioned was sitting at the table, and we all started talking, and all of a sudden, all of these cherubs start flying in from the exterior of the tent, and the whole room starts to light up. And there were 300 cherubs, and all of a sudden walks in Prophet Muhammad. And I met him in temple when I very first got to heaven. So here he is again, and I'm thinking, wait, why are you here? Oh wow. So we all stood up, and we bowed, and then he gently did that, telling us to sit down. And then he looked directly at me and he said, Megan, when you go back, I want you to tell everyone that I am constantly praying for the Middle East. I have never stopped being there for them. I am there for everyone, even including me, okay, including you. So he prays for everybody. And so I looked at him, and he gives me these messages. And then I respectfully asked him, why do you want me to tell this message? I don't understand. I don't know anything about your teachings. I grew up Catholic, like in California. What am I supposed to do? And he said to me, I have my ways. And he said, just tell everybody I love them. And I thought, okay, I can do that. So after he left the tent, then all of the angels followed him. And then we all sat around quiet. I mean, you could hear a pin drop in that moment. And then somebody started talking, and I think it was, I'm trying to remember, I don't remember which one started talking first, but all of a sudden, Freddie Mercury, no, it was Marvin Gaye. And he said, I wish, Megan, that you would go back and talk about the civil rights movement and being Black in that period of time, and how difficult it was for me and others, and how we were spat on and all of this stuff. So it felt like it was becoming this political thing, right? Or I'm not political. So I'm like sitting there going, okay, why would you be telling me? I don't understand, But each one of these souls told me their struggles and trauma as a human on earth. And so for Marvin Gaye and Rick James, Ella Fitzgerald, Cole Porter, every single one of them talked about the civil rights movement and what it was like to be Black, and how they were totally unfairly treated, and how they were, the stories were just like, it was the saddest thing, to hear. And then I remember Freddie Mercury piping in and saying, it wasn't easy for me to transition during the height of my career from being a heterosexual to a homosexual. And, and he goes into how he felt, and that he had a message for his then partner who was with him when he passed, and that he always loved him, and that he was so grateful that he was in his life. And then Billy Barty, who I'd met a couple of times, once as a kid, and then again as an adult, but years before this near-death experience happened to me. And he said, it was very difficult being from the 1920s. I'd be walking around with my parents, and people would look at me and laugh and say, oh, look at the funny little man, and things like this. And I was crying when I was sitting there. And every one of them wanted their message to get out. And so I felt like this huge responsibility was being put onto me to speak for them. And they said, Megan, you have nothing to worry about. You can see there's nothing to fear. And they said, we don't want to reincarnate to go back and give this message. Go back and tell them the message is love. Love is what it is. This is what generates the energy and the creation of everything, you know? So that's what I'm to do. And going back to sitting in temple, God ordered me to write a book, which I only just last year published and got out. I mean, because I got another visit from heaven. I've been getting visits since 2007. They just show up, you know. And the last visit was, you have until November. So literally on 11/11/22, that's when my book was published. I didn't plan it, you know. So, but yeah, there were beautiful, beautiful souls and beautiful messages from each of them. There was that concert. There was a going away party that they did for me. God put these on for me. And, you know, I guess, I mean, I didn't believe in him. I can say that. I even questioned him in the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, like, who is this God thing? I mean, what is this all about? So then one day after my near-death experience, this is like a couple years after, I'm sitting at home and I'm watching National Geographic, and up comes the picture of God. And I'm like, what? And they said, and this is the face of Jesus. And it was the Shroud of Turin. And I'm laying there and I'm going, that's not Jesus, that's God, you know? And so his eyes were not open because he was showing disappointment in, you know, Jesus being murdered, and Jesus was the highest frequency of love on earth, just as Prophet Muhammad was. So they were equal in their ranks, just at different periods of time. There were so many other things that happened. So I remember I was standing in a circle. There was a circle of ascended masters and saints and archangels standing around me. And then there were cherubs fluttering around. And I was crying because I didn't want to go back to Earth. And they were all telling me, you have to go back now. You have more work to do. And I said, I don't want to go back. I just want to stay here. And they said, no, you can't. You can't now. You have to go back, or you're going to have to reincarnate. Oh, that's right. Reincarnation. I'm not going to reincarnate again. No way. I started crying, and then each one of them put up their right hands, you know, at different times with different messages to me. And I don't remember the messages, but they were short and sweet and filled with love. And they were doing the white flame from their hand onto my soul. And so then I stopped crying. And then I remember I was taken with Jesus and Saint Germain. I don't know how far the distance was where we walked, but then we wound up under this olive tree. And so Saint Germain sat down, and he was sitting in the shade, and Jesus and I were standing talking. And, you know, Jesus looked at me and he says, okay, well, you have to go back now. And I said, Jesus, I don't want to go back. I cannot stand the thought of having to go back to Earth. I said, I've never felt more love in my life. I just want to stay here. And he said, well, and then he did this, like, you know, I'm sure it's like Jesus Psychology 101, where there was this little headshot picture of my then husband and my son. And my son was 4 years old at the time. And both of them said in unison, telepathically, don't go, we need you. And so then I looked at Jesus and I said, oh my gosh, my son needs me. I have to go back. And he goes, okay, well, you got to go back. So I said, okay. And then I gave him a hug and I started to leave. And as I'm walking down this dirt road, I knew that I had to go to this shack. There was this wooden shack, and I had to take my robe off and the stole and put it in a wicker basket so they could, I don't know if that was like their laundry drop-off point or whatever, but I dropped it off in there. So I had to go walking back into my body, and so to my left was this like field of flowers and tall grass. And then there were trees behind it, and Prophet Muhammad and all of the angels started walking toward me again. And so I went over to him as he's walking this way and I'm walking forward. So we meet. I can't remember what he said, but then I looked at him and I said, I have to go back. And he said, I know. And I said, I don't want to go back. And he said, Megan, you're going to be fine. He said, my hand is always at your back. I will always be there and giving you love and protecting you. And then I had to keep going. So as I walked down the road more, then I had to go through the clouds at some point, and then I woke up in my body. And I remember there was a nurse there, and I looked at her and I just said, I just saw Jesus, because that's what I remembered immediately. So it was, then I was back in my body. But since then, I've gotten numerous visits from Jesus, from Archangel Michael, from God, from Goddess, all at the same time, sometimes just one at a time. One time it was me in the clouds with everybody who is in temple at the golden table. So the golden table was in the clouds and God was there and all of the cherubs and archangels and stuff. It was really amazing. And they had messages for me every time.